Good evening, friends. Welcome to the webinar uh, dealing with insurance. I am Robert Besser, your conference treasurer and benefits officer, and also I am helping people get into the webinar and trying to mute everyone at the same time. So forgive me as I try to get everybody in on the webinar. I'm going to introduce Reverend Will Reed to our conversation, and then I'll let Will begin and introduce our guest. This is our third webinar that we have had that we've sponsored dealing with insurance, and all of them are recorded so that others are able to view them at a later time. Will, I invite you to unmute yourself, and if you'll begin.
Okay, thanks, Robert. So tonight, we want to introduce to you our colleagues with McGriff Insurance Services. They are a group that has worked with a number of other annual conferences, and we vetted them among a group of 4 other insurance companies to try to work together with us to come up with a solution to help address the insurance crisis that many of our churches are facing. The McGriff team is led by Andre Como, who is in my upper left-hand corner. I don't know if he's in your upper left-hand corner, but he's waving at us now. And then also on their team is Gilbert Talbot, who's kind of in the middle of my screen. I don't see Braxton Watson on the screen anywhere. But Charlotte LeBlanc is somewhere, I think, on the screen. And then Veronica Castillo is also a part of the McGriff team. I'm going to ask, my computer is asking, it sounds like I've switched to a different language. I am not, can you understand me? So,
yes, we can see you and hear you.
Well, it was weird. It asked me if I was speaking Arabic. So I've never had that come up before. So anyway, Andre has some slides to share and also kind of going to talk through the plan that we are going to undertake to try to address the insurance crisis in a group way here in the Texas Annual Conference. What we will do in terms of questions is ask you to place them in the chat, and I'll try to group them together so that Andre and Gilbert and Braxton and Charlotte can work together to answer those questions. So Andre, why don't you start? Robert, have you allowed him to share his screen with us?
Yes, I'll start. So thank you for having us, and we're very happy to be working with you. The rest of the team and myself, we've done a lot of legwork in advance. We did some work to present ourselves as someone who can assist you in finding solutions. And the slides that I'm going to show you are some of the slides that we presented when we were courting before we were hired, to give you an idea of what we're going to try to attempt. In its simplest form, we're going to try to reduce the cost of your insurance purchases in 2 ways. One is by group purchase, leveraging the power of a large number of churches to buy insurance. And then the second way is to share some of the risk. Instead of paying premium for an insurance company to take that risk off of our shoulders, we're going to and we'll have options at various amounts of the risk we want to keep ourselves. But those are the 2 ways. Neither of these concepts is new. These are things that, if you think of yourselves as a corporation with a number of different locations and different profit centers, this is the same thing that large corporations do every day. There are some conferences that arrange their insurance in a group purchase, and there are some that do not. And as we'll get to later in here, the biggest challenge for all of us is to be able to get the information together that the underwriters are going to need to get comfortable that they understand the risks that they will be offering to accept when they quote insurance for the conference that will allow the conference to cover all or multiple churches. So I'm going to try to share my screen here, and I'll try to remember to pause, Will, so that if questions are coming up in the chat box, you can pose them. But if you need to just interrupt me, please do. So please tell me if you can see my screen. Should be
Here it
coming up
comes.
now.
We can see your screen, Andre.
Okay, great. So it's the opening screen, today's date, and we'll be talking about the insurance solutions. The next slide, this is a list of what we would call church niche underwriting companies. These are companies that advertise themselves and that we find in the marketplace to specialize in some way in underwriting churches. They've set up certain underwriting criteria to be able to do that. Now we have them listed here for you by their AM Best rating. It's the most common way that we identify and recognize the financial strength, the ability of an insurance company to honor the promises it makes when it issues a policy, the financial strength or the claims paying ability of an insurance company. And you'll see most of the names, or several of the names that you would recognize down at the bottom. These are the smaller and as well as the more lower rated. And so there's a bit of a crisis on top of an already hard insurance market with regard to churches, because Church Mutual, which is a dominant player in this area, has had their insurance rating, their A rating, placed under review with negative implications, which means that AM Best believes that their financial situation is precarious, and if they don't change what they're doing, they're in jeopardy of losing their A rating. So they may have a B rating. And that's what happened to Brotherhood Mutual just a couple of months ago. They were downgraded from A to B++. Guide One is not currently under review. The outlook in their rating is negative. And so what these insurance companies have to do is they have to, in order to right the ship, they have to write less insurance. They have to get rid of some of their risk. And then for the risk that they keep, they have to charge more premium for it. And so a lot of churches have been non-renewed. A lot of church insurance has been canceled. And there are fewer insurance companies willing to write insurance. In fact, several on this list currently do not write any new insurance policies in the state of Texas. Some do, some don't. That changes from time to time. We might lose another one or two, or we might have one or two more open up. But these are the domestic, the U.S.-based insurance companies that specialize in churches, and this is part of the issue that we're challenged with. So, if you can, like you see on TV often, if you bundle, you can save, right? Bundle and save. Buy several different types of insurance from one insurance company. That's what you want to do. And Church Mutual has used this model for years. Our first choice, if we could buy all of our insurance, our wind and hail, our fire, those are two different pieces of the property insurance, and our liability coverages, which would be our general liability, our auto liability, our directors and officers, our pastors, counselors liability, sexual abuse and molestation, any of those types of liabilities. Church Mutual was packaging all of that together in a nice and a very good set of coverages for churches. Guide One, and there are others who may have done the same thing. The second choice, and what we're going to try to go for here, is to or actually the second or third choice, but the second choice would be to find one insurance company to take all of the wind and hail coverage. Those companies that do write property insurance, there's a lot more who will write the property insurance excluding wind and hail than those that'll include wind and hail. And of course, as you get into what I call the hail belt or the coastal regions, those numbers dwindle. The third choice would be to find one insurance company or one set of insurance companies in a single policy to write the wind and hail and fire, all of the property coverages, with the exception of earthquake and flood. But most of us are buying wind, hail, and fire, or that's what we're accustomed to buying. And then one policy for the liability. So the one policy for the liability will be certainly an easier trick because many of these niche companies are still writing the liability, even though they might not be writing the property. So that's you know, we want to package as much as possible, but option one is just not available today, or choice one. The second choice, we're going to explore it, but it's probably going to be the third choice that we'll end up with. Will, any questions coming in so far? So with regard to
Not
the
so far.
property, good. With regard to the property, this is an example of what we're going to try to do in terms of both the group purchase and the sharing of risk. So if you look on the left, there's two sort of stacks here on the left. Let's assume that we had 200 churches and a total of $200 million in total insured values. And all of those churches, if all of those churches were currently insured separately, and you total up the limits, the policy limits for all of those churches, you'd probably have about $200 million in limits. What we know from science and experience and catastrophe modeling is the chances that all 200 of those churches would be completely wiped out is almost nothing. And so you don't really need to have, for these 200 churches, you don't really need to have $200 million in limits. And we're going to be running various models once we get the information to determine what is a reasonable limit to buy that can be used by any single church or group of churches may be damaged or lost in a fire or in a catastrophic windstorm. And so if you look to the right, the shared risk example, we would have what some people would call a loss limit policy or a shared limit policy. It might only require a $100 million limit to insure adequately all 200 churches in this example. And it might also make sense to buy a deductible that's larger, take more risk, insure less risk by taking the larger deductible, and then sharing that deductible among the churches. And we'll talk about that a little bit more detail here in just a second. We go to the next slide. Yes, sir.
Andre, can you back up one slide, the previous slide, and tell about the flags? Sure.
Thank you. So first choice, you would want a domestic, a US-based insurance company. When you have to go outside of the US, particularly to London or any of the other markets, London being the primary source outside the US, the prices are just higher. These are sort of the second place you want to go. Today, to pursue your second choice, for wind and hail, you'd have to go to the Texas Wind Pool, although they only will write coverage for wind and hail along the coast, or you'll have to go to London or find some mix of London the domestic companies, and then the Texas Wind Pool. And so the third choice, what we're likely to come up with is a combination on the property, a combination of domestic and Lloyd's syndicates to put together a single policy to cover what we're talking about here.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Okay, so back to this slide. I'm going to move this stack on the right side of this slide is going to appear now on the left side of this slide. And what I'm showing you is that on the face of the policy, it's going to look like there's one policy with one limit to cover the conference and all of the churches that participate in this conference program. But behind the scenes, there's actually several different insurance companies that are each taking a slice or a piece of the risk. So these are called shared and layered insurance policies, and we do these often, and we're doing them a lot more in this current market. So let's say that there's a 10% deductible for the wind and hail perils, and there are 4 different insurance companies, companies A, B, C, and D, who each participate in a layer of coverage. Then there's another layer of coverage that a single insurance company takes. And then you see shares and layers that'll get us up to the $100 million limit that we're assuming would be the correct shared limit for this policy. So there could be as many as 10 or 12 different insurance companies involved in one property policy for the conference. And so here's an example of how the wind deductible might be shared. And so bear with me, I'll go through this. Assume we had a hurricane and our policy deductible was 10%, and that all of the participating churches' total insured values, as we talked about, were $200 million. Well, let's say there were 5 churches affected in this hurricane, and the first church had a $10 million value. Second church, 5 million, 3, 2, 1 on down, but the total values for the affected churches was $21 million. Well, so those are the values. Let's say that the loss was not total loss in any of these, that the first church was a $4 million loss, 2 million, 1, and then $500,000. If this church had its own deductible, its own policy, its own 10% deductible, then that church would be responsible for 10% of 10 million or $1 million in the deductible. And then the same calculation is made for these other churches. So there would be a total of $2.1 million in deductibles on this loss for a group policy. These would be the individual losses or the individual deductible amounts. This would be the total deductible amount for this particular occurrence, for this hurricane. But if we agreed to share this and used the percentage of the total insured values, so this church is a $10 million church, which represents 5% of the total 200 million in values. That's the percentage of TIV, 5%. This church in the group shared deductible arrangement would only be responsible for $105,000 as opposed to $1 million. Okay. Now, you can see the same calculation is made here. What's important to understand is that there are churches that are not affected that would still be responsible for contributing to the deductible, because it's a shared deductible. You're sharing risk as opposed to transferring that risk in exchange for premium to the insurance companies. And so some of these, you might have a $5 million church that was not affected at all, but in this arrangement would still be responsible for part of the deductible. That's a lot of little detail there. Let me stop there, Will, and see if anybody has any questions.
So we have a question. So you're saying that unaffected churches would also have to pay a deductible. How does that end up being less expensive is the question.
Well, we are going to show several scenarios. We don't know exactly what losses any one or any group of churches are going to have, but we will show several scenarios. We'll show it with the premium at 5% and at 10%. And you also don't know, if you continue to buy insurance on your own, what kind of loss, or if any loss, you'll have. So you're going to take what you're paying now and what you might have to pay in a deductible and compare it to what you're going to pay and what you might have to pay in a deductible under this scheme.
And just to add a little bit of color, I apologize. I'm traveling today. This is Braxton Watson from McGriff. To add to Andre's point is, I think a level set on all of this is we are positioning and kind of educating the conference on the types of levers that exist. And this is not at this point in any way a pigeonhole towards a strategy. We want to basically expose the marketplace of what effects can we have on our total cost by making X, Y, Z, or any combination of structure changes. And as far as like the commentary on how does that lower my total cost, a way that we've discussed this with some of the members that stopped by at the conference to talk through this was, it's the same. We feel that same pressure in the personal lines world, just as we all buy homeowners insurance. Is my property individually may not be affected by a storm, but over the course of the next renewal and the future renewals, I am still effectively paying for the losses that incurred, even if it's not directly tied to that storm. It's a component of the premium that affects my renewal increases. And so what we want to build really, and I think that scale and sort of attraction that Andre's mentioning in the marketplace is when we have a larger volume and we can get the underwriting marketplace more excited, and we also have more ways to manipulate the placement to build consistency over time, where today's world of a package carrier writing churches in Texas is just not guaranteed in the future. And so this is a way to create a structure that could create some advantages by being a larger buyer, and that scale allows us to be more creative in how we retain risk, or ultimately even just the program structure itself, even if the lever for the deductibles was not pulled.
Thank you, Braxton.
Thank you, Braxton. So that was, we were talking about property. So on liability, which is easier to get, but still a challenge and still in a hard market situation, most of the churches have purchased a traditional insurance policy with a deductible of some kind. And there are many ways that businesses today share in risk and buy less insurance. Captive insurance groups, risk retention groups, group self-insurance, these are all regulated schemes by which like-minded, unrelated businesses can pool themselves together to share risk and to share. They don't call it sharing deductibles. What they do is they put money into a pool for what the insurance company would identify as a self-insured retention. And if there is a claim, that first layer of coverage, there may be a deductible for the individual member of the pool, but the group is going to pay for a layer of coverage before the insurance or reinsurance kicks in. These are things that you don't need to do because you're not unrelated business. You would be like-minded related businesses. And with the trust clause, the the conference has an insurable interest in all of the assets of all of the churches, not just the real assets or the property, the buildings, but also the financial assets and the operational risks that can the risks that can weigh on the financial assets of the churches. And so one of the conferences that we work with has a risk purchasing group. A single insurance company writes individual policies for every church in the conference. Each church has its own deductible. Some churches have higher deductibles than other deductibles. They don't share in any of the risk, but they all get some discount for being in the group. That's a possibility here, and it's certainly something we'll explore. But it's not what we put forth as what we think is going to ultimately work when we get into the marketplace. We think that a traditional insurance policy with a shared deductible or a self-insured retention that we can share in a way that's equitable is going to be the most effective way to do this. If it's not, and there's a better solution, we will find it in the marketplace and we will present it. But again, this is what we, when we presented ourselves as a candidate to work with you, this is what we presented as the plan that we're going to take forward.
Andre, there are a couple of questions that we might want to take before we move on. One is a question about whether this would be one umbrella, one policy altogether, or would we group districts by district, groups and districts, or something like that? And we talked about doing this all together, correct?
That's correct. You know, if there's a way to, if there's a reason to break it out, we can certainly evaluate that. And if we have the information segregated correctly, which we should have once we've gathered the information, and we're going to talk about that in a bit of detail here in a few minutes. It's very important. But yes, we're talking about one policy where the conference will be the first named insured on the policy, and the individual churches will also be named insureds on the policy. As I understand it today, each church is going to have its own, its name as the first named insured on the policy, and then perhaps the conference is an additional insured. We're talking about one policy written to the conference to cover the conference and all of the churches that participate.
And then we have another question that's sort of related as well. And the question is, you're talking about $2 million churches. We're a tiny little church with a building that only has a value of a tad over $100,000. So the question is, I don't know how we'd be able to do anything towards that large deductible unless it's a percentage of what value we have on our building. So can you explain that?
Yes, and so the unless at the end of that question is correct. In this arrangement, that church would only be responsible for its fraction. If that church is 0.5% of the total values, it would only be responsible for 0.5% of the loss. If that church today is a $100,000 building and you have a 10% wind and hail deductible, and you're looking at $10,000 deductible, you'll have to compare that to the scenarios that we present. We're going to be running catastrophe models to try to give you an idea of not only the likely limit that will be needed, but in that worst case scenario, what would the deductible look like? And it's going to be, there's not going to be apples to apples comparison. It's going to have to be a decision made by that individual church, and in the process, we expect we will present this. Some churches may say we want to participate. Some churches say this just isn't right for us. Once we know who wants to participate, then we're going to have to recalculate and represent. But we anticipate that some churches, it just might not be, they just might not be comfortable with this.
And just to add on, I had shot a few notes back in the chat as well. And so a couple kind of comments to further support that. And I know a few folks have asked on the deductible side, the percentage amount. And so that the percentage amount of where the deductible, and the example would be a wind or hail event, that deductible, inclusive of your current policies, is going to be calculated based on the value of the buildings that are damaged, not based on the value of the loss. Oftentimes, especially with smaller placements or smaller valued properties as well, is those carriers will say there's a percentage deductible that applies, which is also subject to a minimum dollar amount, which can often be much higher than the percentage amount. Those are the types of, we don't have a lot of negotiating power or strength in the market as a smaller church. And so those are the types of things that we can work to negotiate in a larger placement. I can tell you as well that we have seen, I would say we are very open to the strategy that ultimately drives down the costs collectively for the conference, as well as lower the allocated cost to each of your churches. If a solution exists where it's best to have two programs, one for CAT exposed property and non-CAT exposed, non-weather catastrophe exposed properties, that could also be a solution that ultimately creates the lowest total cost. And part of the work that McGriff is going to go through as we model, as we look through really sort of deductible structure and program structure that would make sense, is also work through what an allocation model would look like, so that there aren't these large shocks in deductible expense that your church is not planning on, right? Whereas you have a policy today that is built for you. There are also, weather events that can happen in that policy that you don't necessarily plan for. If our program, the design of it, if we can show you an allocated cost that is much lower than your existing program today, and there's a method that makes sense to help allocate deductible structures to make a significant event smoother for all parties and still keeps the lowest total cost of risk, that's our end goal. But it does take the engagement and that participation on this front end of data collection helps us develop the best strategy and sell this into the marketplace for the best option.
Thank you, Braxton. Do we have any other questions in the chat, Will, that we need to cover before we move on?
For smaller churches, doesn't it really matter if the larger churches participate? Because $100,000 church would have to pay more for the percentage if the highest value of the church is only, because $100,000 church would have to pay more from the percentage if the highest value church is only $1 million, but would pay much less if there are a number of large churches in the plan. So
the more participation we have, this could work for 200 small churches. It could work for 20 large churches. And the
more
idea,
churches that we participate, the better, right?
That's right, regardless of size. And as Braxton was saying, finding the most equitable way. Again, we're going to try to save money by purchasing as a group and save money by sharing risk as opposed to transferring risk and buying more insurance. We're going to try to buy less insurance, and we're going to try to pay less for it because we're buying as a group. And so an equitable distribution of the premium, as well as an equitable distribution of the shared losses, is going to be key to getting churches interested to participate. If we can't do that, it's just not going to work. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So we're going to talk about the information that we're going to gather. And if you filled out an application for any of these church niche markets, you know, they have very detailed and lengthy questionnaires. They ask a lot of questions. And so what we've taken, and some of them ask the same question. Church Mutual and Brotherhood Mutual and Guide One and Philadelphia might all ask a single question exactly the same way. Some ask questions that others don't ask. But we're going to be going to several 10 or 12 different insurance companies, not just for the liabilities, but for the properties. And so we have created an application based on their applications so that we can give you one set of applications to fill out that we can take to multiple churches. And so we've done quite a bit of work pulling this together. There are 6, and this is going to be in a Microsoft Excel format. And we will have 6 different what are called workbooks, Microsoft Excel workbooks. The first one that we're going to talk about, and Gilbert's going to demonstrate a couple of these, is the Occurrence Liability Applications Workbook. There's 10 different tabs, general information, various bits and pieces of information. And we've separated the occurrence liability applications from what are called claims made liability applications. I'll just tell you really quickly, the difference is that a claims made policy will pay for claims that are made during the policy period, even if they occurred prior to the policy beginning. So not like a property policy. A property insurance policy is an occurrence type policy. It pays for occurrences that take place during the policy period. An auto liability policy pays for occurrences that take place between the effective date and the expiration date during the policy period. A claims made policy, which is more likely for counselor's liability, professional liability, sexual abuse and molestation, those are those policies respond to claims that are made during the policy period, and they don't pay for any claims. There's always a backstop. There's always a date back in time, which would be the earliest date for which a claim may have occurred and be covered on the policy. And so it's very important that when we gather the information, we understand that set of policies and their dates so that we can jive them correctly and there are no gaps and no duplications in coverage. Sorry, that's a little bit of a detailed tangent I got off on, but separate application for automobile. And even if your church does not have a van or a bus, there is going to be an automobile exposure because someone in your church is using an automobile to further the church's business. It might be no more than a secretary going to the bank to make a deposit. It might be the pastor heading over to the hospital to say a prayer for someone who is at the hospital. There is an exposure to the church. So even if you don't have automobiles, that we would ask you to answer the questions that apply to you in that application. This property application, workers' compensation application, and then the cyber risk application. We've created that one separately because so that you can just email it to whoever handles your technology. It's best that you probably just let them fill that out and answer the questions about what kind of firewalls, et cetera, that you have. And so these are going to be going out in the not too distant future. We sent a draft of the email to you, Will and Robert, earlier today.
I saw it right before we got on.
Yeah, late today. Didn't intend for you to look at it, but I wanted you to have it so that you guys can look at it before it goes out.
Andre, before you go on, there is a question I think that's important, and it's a question related to people being concerned about the deductible and also concerned about that providing comfort to participating churches that deductibles will be covered. And so they're asking, can TMF or TAC participate to provide comfort in that? And if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, sure. So in all of these types of programs where there's going to be a shared deductible, when we present what we believe is the appropriate allocated cost to each church and the anticipated deductible in a worst case scenario that the conference would have to pay, and what the allocation of those deductibles would be to the churches, we are going to suggest that before any claims happen, that all of the churches put in to the deductible loss fund some amount of money. And we'll describe that to you, and that the conference will be the place where that money is held, so that when a claim does happen, there are funds available to make those payments. That fund would be, let's say that the total number that's needed is $1 million, okay, for the worst case scenario. You and the conference are going to have to decide whether or not you want to fully fund that up front. We'll give you various options, but let's say that you fund it and that the amount that is used in the first year is not completely needed. It usually, in these arrangements, it's usually a 3-year process to fully fund what the worst case scenario might be. And so if in the first year those funds are not used, then they are retained. And then the second year, additional funds are added, they are retained. And the third year, the deductible fund should be fully funded. It would be held by the conference at the conference level and available to be used for paying claims at the conference level, as opposed to once the claim happens, every individual church getting an invoice or a notice or an assessment that they've got to put that in. All of those numbers will be shown. All of the projections will be shown. It'll be as Braxton was talking about, we're looking at a total cost over the long term. There'll be an opportunity for you to compare what you would be putting in premium and in a deductible fund, and compare that to what you're paying now for the insurance that you have.
And that's a good point, Andre. And I do just want to emphasize this to the group is we're talking about a dramatically different structure than each church currently participates in. The simplest way for us to walk through these levers and different structures and ways to drive down this cost would be, our goal is for this shared program is for the premium, the direct premium, plus this lost fund contribution, sort of pre-paying for deductibles, if you will, for that total cost as allocated to each church to still be less than your current insurance premium, right? So we are effectively creating a structure, building a program that we have more scale in the market. We get this put together. It does require modeling and participation from the group to get the underwriters to actually create a structure like this that will negotiate. And then as it's all being reviewed, then we determine what's the most effective structure for the conference and specific areas within the conference or individual churches. Really, it's a way to show you that cost today as a total cost of risk. If individual churches under package policies, even if Church Mutual does, kind of revive and come back with great capacity, we are still not, a wind event. Budgeting for that deductible is likely something that is, possibly underfunded. And so those events, even in an individual placement, it's a catastrophic event. If our policy pre-funds that deductible as a portion of the total premium, we think that can be an effective way to smooth costs over time and ultimately lower that total cost.
Thank you, Braxton. I do see another couple of questions, Will. One is, so essentially we are creating a mutual. You can certainly think of it that way, okay? But one, you're not gonna have to pay for all of the legal expenses associated with getting a license from the state to operate a mutual insurance company. And you don't have to, because again, this is the kind of thing that corporate America does every day. And the corporation would allocate out to the individual profit and loss centers the costs as well as the savings that would otherwise go to the insurance company. So yeah, it's like making a mutual. It's an informal mutual, but same kind of thing. And then will the conference be earning interest on the deductible funds? If so, will they pass those earnings on to the participating churches after the fund is fully funded? Will there be refunds to participating churches? So those are great questions that we've discussed very, very, very much on the surface. Once it's fully funded, then the annual contributions for premium and loss funds will be only the annual contributions for premiums. You would no longer need to put in funds to the losses. So that's, whether dividends are given back or not, that would be a question for the conference. Does the conference want to continue to collect these funds and build a larger fund and pay dividends or pay interest back to the churches? I would assume so, but that would be a question for Will or Robert.
And there's another question that Robert asked of me. At what point does the church have to decide to go or to no go? And then there's a question also about a church that is premium, or there's renewal is coming up soon. When will this be ready? So I know you're going to go over the timeline at some point here. And so I just want to make you aware of that so that you can answer those questions when you go over the timeline.
Sure. All right, let me go and let me ask Gilbert to step in and share his screen. Gilbert's going to pull up a couple of these applications and show us just the mechanics. We have offered, and we haven't scheduled yet, but we've been offered to host some webinars on actually how to fill out these applications. We're available to do that, and I'll be talking to Will and Robert about how best to schedule that for you all that are interested. Gilbert, I can see your screen.
Thank you, Andre, and good evening, everyone. So the first workbook that I'm going to be going over is going to be the occurrence liabilities workbook. So right here, as you see at the bottom, we have.
Excuse me, Gilbert, could you increase your size of your screen just a little bit? Perfect, thank you.
You tell me when to stop. Is this perfect? Is this good? All right, awesome. So this is the occurrence liabilities workbook. All of the workbooks will have multiple tabs at the bottom right here. I just wanted to point these out. Each workbook will start off with a brief explanation of the instructions. And as Andre pointed out, in this specific workbook, the different tabs are related to the common and operations information, general liability detail for buildings, and so forth and so on. So each workbook will start off with an instruction tab. You're then going to proceed. So this first tab right here is the common and operations info. What's important about all of these different tabs that you're going to go through for the occurrence workbook is that each church is only responsible for filling in the blue highlighted sections. For this first one, what's important, and I'm just going to, make up some names and numbers right here. So if my church name was Gilbert UMC, for the address, I'm just going to put that in there. Let's say I'm located in Houston. We had a beautiful time. It's a great city. I'm in Texas, and I don't know the Houston zip code, so I'm just going to make that one up. So when you get to your district, we do have these drop-down boxes in multiple sections. They are fully functional. You're going to select your district. We ask that you include the church website, the contact for the church that we will be speaking with if we need additional information, the phone number and the email. What's important about this first tab is that all of the general information that's filled in this top box, if I click on this second tab, it will automatically be populated. So you won't have to continue that process. So going back to that first tab, like I said, the churches are only required to fill in the information that's highlighted in these blue sections. So there are questions associated with it. For some of them, they are drop downs. Is there a risk manager in place? If there is, are they full-time or part-time? You just select that one. If there's no risk manager, you would select no. You would continue that process going down through the entire section right here. We do know it is lengthy, but as Andre pointed out, all of this information is pertinent to the underwriters. And so we have to collect it. I'm going to shift to that second tab, the general liability tab. Like I pointed out, this is already populated. And the same thing goes for this. You're only required to fill in the sections that are highlighted in blue. And there are different sections that we've outlined: property information, premises, and life safety, and so forth and so on for the rest of this page. And then we're going to keep going. So right here in this section, I'm just going to delete these very quickly, and I'll show you when we get to the property section. For the general liability for the detail of buildings. So let's say my church, Gilbert UMC, if we have 3 buildings located on one property, let's say we have the main sanctuary chapel, we have the parsonage, and we have an education building. They're 3 separate buildings. They're all at the same address, so that location would be location 1, building 1. And this is for the main sanctuary and chapel. For the parsonage, I would do location 1, building 2. That'll be our second building. And then for the educational building, it will be location 1, building 3. These columns right here are referencing the building number that is at that location, which you will find in the SOV that you have to fill out for the property. So just keep that in mind when you're going through this, that if you have more than one building at the same location, you will have to enter those in. And then it's the same as the first 2. Just the sections that are highlighted in blue is what the church is responsible for. And we continue going down to the General Accord 126. This is just general information. And then this is a continued tab from the GL Accord 126. It was just a little too big for us to fit on one section, so we have it continued right here. The daycare operations. So one of the things we discussed is that when the churches are going through this process, they may see some of the tabs and they may think, well, this doesn't necessarily apply to our church. Even if that's the case, we still ask that each church fill out every tab. And if nothing applies, you would just select no. Either way, if it applies directly or it doesn't apply, we still need to gather that information. We continue to special events, liability, same. Even if it doesn't apply specifically to your church, please fill it out. We have security and law enforcement.
So Gilbert, question, does fill it out mean if they don't have it, they check the box at the top that says, no, we don't have one of those?
Yes, sir. So right here, does your organization operate a child daycare? If you don't, you would select no.
And then you don't fill out the rest of it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then, so the last tab on this page is going to be very important. So this is going to be the liability claim information. So any liability claims that have happened for the churches, that information is going to be filled out right here in this section. One of the main things besides the information that we are going to need for every church is the claim history. And that's going to be the same throughout the general liability, the property. For every section that we're working on, the claims history is going to be very important.
Gilbert, why don't we show them the a property example, and then we'll stop and see if we have some questions.
All righty. So switching over, this is going to be the property workbook right here. So it starts just like the general liability. We have some instructions on how to fill out the statement of value. So if you hear us commonly refer to it as SOV, that's what it stands for. It's a statement of values. So this first tab is going to be just that. At the top right here, you'll see statement date. So let's just say hypothetically, since I'm working on this right now, I'm going to enter today's date right here. And you're going to do the same for the church name, address, city, zip code, website, for all this information. So here's where we get into the fun stuff. So right here, this is the statement of values. So when I was referring to this in the general liability section, so let's say building number 1, that is our main sanctuary and our chapel. We have drop downs right here. So you would select sanctuary/chapel. For building location name, we would refer to the sanctuary/chapel as the main church campus. And then you're going to move down this entire column. So building street address, city, the state, zip code, county, so number of buildings. And what I wanted to point out is that while the churches are filling this out, you may come across a section and you might be a little confused at what we're asking for. If you drag your cursor to this top right corner, there will be an explanation in every section. So for the number of buildings, we've put this should be 1. If there is a reason to list more than one building on one row, please explain at the end of the list. If multiple buildings are connected by walkways, include the value of the walkways in with the largest building. So same for the building value. This is what you are going to enter for the current value of the property that you are insuring. So let's just say hypothetically for the main church campus, I'm going to put 350,000. Improvements and betterments. So in this section, if the building has been enhanced and those values are not included in the building values, add the enhanced value here. Otherwise, use 0. So let's say we haven't had any enhancements. I would enter 0, and that's what it would show up as after you enter 0. For personal property, it's going to include all contents, including furniture, supplies, office equipment, audio, visual equipment. Well, at Gilbert UMC, we like to put on a show, so we have $100,000 in personal property. For annual rentable business, if there's any rental income or other income derived from the building, add the annual revenue here. We don't have any. And what's interesting about this is if you see right here, total insured value, or what we refer to as TIV. So my building value combined with my personal property value, my total insured value of my for the chapel is $450,000. So we've set this up so that it already populates that number for you. So you don't have to worry about doing the math or anything like that. We have that taken care of. One of the main things I wanted to point out with this first page, when we get to this section, it says ISO construction, and we have the ISO occupancy. What we've done right here at the bottom of this tab is we've created these tabs to give you an example of what we're asking for the ISO construction and the occupancy. I want to point out that this bottom right corner is fully scrollable, so make sure that we're starting left to right and we're reading all this information. So going back to the SOV, for the ISO construction, we have numbers 1 through 6. So you would take these numbers and you would go to this tab, and we have all of the different types of constructions that the church could be. So you would simply just read through these, and you would select the number that best suits the construction type for your church. So we're gonna
Gilbert. Yeah. So Gilbert, thanks. I think this has given us a really good idea of how these spreadsheets work. Why don't we touch quickly on the inland marine, and then we'll stop and answer questions. And if there's more questions about the details of these, we'll answer them. But again, when it gets to the time where you're actually trying to fill out these spreadsheets, we're available to assist you.
Great. That was my question, Andre.
Uh,
Who's gonna
yeah,
help us?
Robert, I was going to get there. I kind of get a little excited about these. They're fun to do. But that's the main thing we wanted to point out. Later, when we send out all this information, the churches that are going to participate, you will have your district representative. And if anything comes up, if you're confused about anything, if you need any help, call us. So, for instance, let's just say that I may be the district representative, and somebody gives me a call for whatever reason. I can't take the call. Call Andre, call Braxton. Just because we're district representatives, it doesn't mean that we can't help churches outside of our districts. So if you have any questions, please call us. This is what we're here for. But as Andre said, we're going to move on to the special property, the inland marine section. So in this section, think of it as special property not included in the building value or the personal property value. For example, if you wanted to insure separately an organ, stained glass, stuff of that nature, that is where you would do that in this section right here. And Andre, did you want to touch or add any more to that?
Yeah. Just if it's something that's not already included, contemplated in the value of the building, and you want to show it separately to make sure that it gets replaced, or that it's adequately represented in the statement of values, you can do it here. But otherwise, it would be part of the contents for movable items, part of the building for stained glass, if you don't specify it separately here. Okay. I did see one, let's see, I'm going to go back.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions that I wanted to bring up. One
Will
is
these?
Go ahead.
one is a concern about this being pretty extensive. So the question is, will there be a simple one-page handout that we can present to our trustee in layperson terms?
I wish there was.
do
There's
too,
just
but
not. Okay. This is the game here is to make the underwriter comfortable that they understand what they are insuring. If they don't understand, if they're not comfortable that they understand what they are insuring, if they offer a quote, it will be priced conservatively. And if they're not comfortable, they may say, well, there's just not enough information here. We're not going to participate. We're just not going to offer a quote at all. It is a lot of information.
Yeah, Andre, I added some comments in the chat to this. I believe the question specifically was, is there a one-pager that churches can present to their trustees regarding what we are working to accomplish, not about one-pager for underwriting data. And if I've confused that, I apologize in the chat. For us at this point, it's not possible for us to determine until we receive the data and work into the marketplace what is the absolute most effective structure for the conference. And so I do think there is value, and I believe it should be created. And I will tell you, like, I'm working on a short document of ideas. But until the market response is available with what the actual mechanics of the program would look like, I think the one pager, we can share what we're working to achieve, but the actual results of that analysis with underwriters and how to communicate this to your trustees will be most effective once we have that market response.
Now, thank you, Braxton. If the question is, we're going to, how do we present this to our trustees, in order to gather this information, I think we've got it in a number of places, what we're trying to achieve here and on the front end. And, we can certainly paste that onto a single document if necessary. Will.
Okay. There continue to be a number of questions about timeline. I know that's in your presentation, but could you maybe cut to the chase and give them a hint about timeline?
So, yeah, so we're going to ask for this information. I'd be surprised if there is something in place by the end of the year. We're shooting for November, but there are a number of things that have to happen. One, we have to have the information, and we're going to ask you for a deadline of July the 31st to get this information in. If that slides, that'll delay things. Once we have the information, and there was a question about, is it available in something other than the Excel spreadsheet? We've created this in the Excel spreadsheet so that multiple versions, multiple files can be compiled into a single file for the underwriters. They're not going to want to go through every last application. And so we've created this in the Excel format because we have someone that can compile all of this for us. We were going to compile it. We're going to present it to the underwriters. Gilbert and Braxton and I are going to be responsible for checking the applications, and we may have to come back to you and say, you didn't give us this piece of information, or can you clarify that? Or, we've done this before. The claim information is very hard to get in some cases. And so, once we have it all, then we can present it to the underwriters. As Braxton said, we have in mind what solution that we're going to try to target and what we think today is going to work best. But if there are other solutions, we're going to have to analyze those and present those to the conference and to the participating churches in a way that's understandable and in a way that from which you can make a decision. Once decisions are made, if we have multiple churches that want to participate and some churches that don't, then the information that we gave to the underwriter has to be updated. We have to remove the information from all of those churches that gave us information but later chose not to participate. And so then we have to go back to the underwriters, and with a fresh set of data, they will rework the numbers because now the sharing mechanisms will change. So those things are going to take time. In my mind today, I just, if you have a renewal coming up between now and the end of the year, I would plan on going forward with that renewal. Now, if you want another, if you'd like McGriff to handle that for you, we can. And if you're a small church, we have a small business unit that writes hundreds of small churches around the country. That's available. But this solution that we're driving for here, I'm going to say don't expect it before November, because there's just a lot of work that has to take place, a lot of decisions, and a lot of communication, not only from us and the underwriters, but between us and the conference and the churches.
So Andre, excuse me,
Yes.
Will. So if I understand correctly, if a church has a renewal date prior to November, small church, and they are a small church, they could reach out to McGriff, and y'all could help them with getting coverage in the short term or in this gap period.
Yeah, yes, we could. But the ability to get property insurance for a small church along the coast, we're not going to be in a better position than many other agents are to do that. So we can certainly help, and we're happy to do that. If you don't have an agent that's going to be able to do that for you.
I want to point out, Kevin Delaney put a question in the chat. Kevin is one of the persons on our local church insurance team, our task force. a member at Christ Church in Sugar Land. He says, won't doing this work help each church during the short term seeking renewals or gaining new coverages if recently lost? I think the answer is yes. I mean, this is the kind of information, whether you're working with McGriff or with somebody else, to get a good, to get a policy, you're going to have to get a lot of this information together.
Yes,
That's a
and
great point. Oh, go ahead, Andre.
yeah, and in fact, whatever insurance you have now, there's a very good chance that someone has filled out one of these detailed applications or more, one or more of these detailed applications in the past. And someone at the church would have signed that application. The church should have a copy of the applications that were used in the past. And much of the information that we would be asking for could probably be found on those applications. If you don't have that on file at your church, reach out to your agent and ask them for a copy of it. They should be able to provide it.
Thank you.
Other questions before we move on? Did we cover everything that was in the chat?
I think we have covered everything so far.
Hi, Andre, can you hear me? It's Charlotte.
Yes.
I do see a question that I think may have been missed. The question is, if the church doesn't join now, is it possible to join at a later date? And I do apologize if that was answered, but I didn't catch the answer.
Oh, I missed that question.
Yeah, I don't think it was, but it's a good question. And, you know, I'd like, you know, so the answer is yes, a church will be able to join later. You know, that's the truth. It would be easier to pull something like this together if it was required by the conference. The conference is not requiring this. And you know, if too many churches say, well, let's see how it flies and, you know, maybe we'll join later because we don't want to do this work today, then it's not going to work for anybody. You know, we need participation, and I would encourage you. It's a lot of information, but that information is there. I would encourage you to participate for the sake of the conference as a whole.
And adding to that as well is the early participation in this process of the data collection. That creates the scale and structure that and those different kind of levers that we've discussed. If the group of participants is much smaller in the front end, we're not achieving that full scale. I think there are going to be a number of opportunities where we may have a church that individually renews their policy, and they're not able to cancel that policy and join a master program right away. I think what we see with other large property placements is we can craft what's called an ad rate so that we can build a structure that when that minimum premium for cancellation is earned, then the church can then join and roll into this program as an option. But again, that front end work and the volume of data that we have early on really helps drive this process to negotiate the lower terms. Simply put, the more participation early gives us more strength to lower the total cost, where it may be attractive for more churches to actually participate in the program.
Kevin Delaney asks another question. If proactive actions have been taken to prevent future events, where do we share those? For example, a city and a municipal utility district took action to avoid future flooding. So I guess the question is there a notes section to add additional information like that?
Yes, and I think we saw that when Gilbert was showing us the claim detail for one of the sections. That's a great question, and certainly if anything's been done to reduce the chance of something that has happened in the past, to reduce it from happening again, you want that information in the details, in the explanations of those claims. Thank you, Kevin.
You've got a couple more slides, don't you?
Yes, sir. So timeline, and Robert, can you see it?
I can see it.
So here we are, we've been working on these information forms and these instructions, the applications. That's what Gilbert showed us. Here we are today, the Green Beam. We're doing this webinar. We have just a couple of tweaks left on the files that we sent to you, Will and Robert. But we hope that by the end of this week, you and we will be in a position to send the request for information out to all of the churches to begin completing this. We're going to ask that this be done by July the 31st. During that period of time, Andre, Braxton, Gilbert, and we have people that support us that you've not met that may be involved. We're going to be available to help you answer questions. Again, Will, I'm happy to do a webinar, how to complete workbook 1, workbook 2, or however it might be best to do it.
Okay.
And then once we get to July, and if we don't push that date, waiting for additional information to come in, and I'm not trying to invite that. I really, hope we can make this deadline. We're going to give a report to the conference, to Will and Robert, about what we have, and we're going to start going forward to correct, tweak, ask questions about, to clarify and make sure that we scrub up these individual church application documents before we compile it, and so that it's going to be clean and complete when we send it to the underwriters. I can tell you, in another experience, there were some that we just simply excluded because we didn't have the information that we needed to include. And then we're going to submit those to the churches. Elizabeth and Aquia, Charlotte's on the phone, but Elizabeth and Aquia not on the phone. They'll be participating. And then we have more of the timeline to show you. But again, I think ultimately, after we present what we find to the conference, to the churches, show them our suggested allocations of the premiums and the lost funding, and the conference and the churches make some type of decision. If there are churches that are not participating, then we have to purge their information from what we send to the underwriters, resend to the underwriters, recompile, resend to the underwriters. And I just don't anticipate we'll have something to show or be in a position for you to make a decision before November. So that's the timeline. And then, we're here to help. So this information, we've divided ourselves up into the various districts. Braxton is in Houston. We made it easy for Braxton. He's got the Metro District. Most of the questions in our experience, can be handled over the phone. In some cases, we have to go out and visit with the church. We can do that. I've had a couple of churches where, there's one, it's a small church. There's one trustee. He's not skilled with the Excel workbook. He asked us to print it out, send it to him. He'd fill it out and send it back. Okay, we did that. If we had to do that on all of them, this wouldn't work. We did it for 2 out of all of the churches in Louisiana that we approached. And we've had to go out and visit some. Most of the questions we can handle over the phone. And if your church has the information available and the understanding of what we're asking, you've done it before, and you have the skills necessary to manipulate the Excel spreadsheet, and you can do it all yourself, please do. But if you need our help, we're available to help you.
Friends, I have put my email address in the chat as well. We would like to, we can see your names. Some of your names we recognize, some of your names we don't. Many of your churches we may know about because of who you are, but we don't know who all of you are. So if you don't mind sending me just a quick brief email with your name, your email, and your church name, that would be very helpful. And so we kind of know who's on here.
And church city, because sometimes it's just First UMC or
Right.
and there's several First UMCs.
Correct. Thank you.
So I do see Sydney's asking a question. Is there data on where you have done this and that there's a big reduction in cost of the individual churches? So no is the short answer. The longer answer is there are many examples where this has been done in the business world, buying insurance as a group as opposed to individually, and then reducing the amount of insurance you buy by sharing risk as opposed to transferring risk is a well-worn success story. The situation with churches has only recently popped up because of the issue with the niche churches that are starting to get out of the market and get away from writing property insurance. So I'd love to be able to tell you that it's a slam dunk and it's been done before, but we're taking concepts that have been used successfully before and we're applying them to a group of churches. That's what's going on here.
And just to add to that, and not to belabor the point, but I think the nature of the situation of how the insurance market is responding to churches is specifically regarding property insurance, is to be effective in this placement and drive down the cost. We need to think about property insurance as really the industry or operations are not as important as the values and the spread of risk of the buildings, right? The underwriters in this space are insuring the roofs, the walls, the buildings. And so what I can tell you, so McGriff is 5th or 6th largest broker in the world for insurance. In Houston, we've got 255 employees, and we place more property insurance, so by values, than any other broker in the Gulf Coast. So this coastal and I would say cat exposed property, cat hail and non-named stormed wind is a significant issue as we move away from the coast in Texas. So we are very familiar and have been successful in other very large property placements. So we understand this well. We know the battle that exists right now for churches. It's a shift in the mindset of, instead of a package carrier who offers us all coverage, liability, auto, property, is splitting out the property from the liability lines and looking at property as the most effective way to attack that marketplace with underwriters that can provide us limit. So again, I'm sorry if I'm overstating this, but I just want to, that is the work that we're trying to achieve. And that's why really at this point, gathering the data is the most important part of this timeline for us to be able to bring value to the conference.
Well, I see people putting in the chat the name of their church and that information.
And a lot of them are sending it to me. My email is
Okay.
going crazy over here on the left. So
Yeah, because if they don't send you an email, we won't know how to reach them.
yeah, that email is great. So thank you, those of you who are sending it by email to me. That's great. There is, I saw a question in here. Christy Hale's asking, what is the definition of coast? I'm assuming that's the first 1 or 2 counties along the coast that are included in that.
That's a good a good understanding and way to convey that is the underwriters really talk about tier 1 counties. So that would be the first county on the coast. There are exceptions to that. And because of what's happened in the marketplace and sort of how storms have changed and property values. An example is Harris County, which is not the first county on the coast. It's not a tier 1 county. It is still considered coastal to the insurance marketplace. So again, it does depend a little bit. As Andre mentioned early on, the Texas Windstorm Pool, which is TWIA, TWIA, that is another tool that is available to certain parts of our coast that is familiar to, or it's similar to the National Flood Program. It's a government subsidized insurance tool that we think also could be valuable to some of the coastal churches that are in the area in which TWIA operates as well. So did that answer the question, Will?
Yes, and Kevin Delaney asked a question, will workbooks be sent to every pastor at every TAC church? Yes, we have a draft email that has been prepared that we will tweak along and include with that the workbooks, and we will send that to churches, but that we have in our database, but particularly we will also send it to everyone that's sent us your email through this webinar. So I've got a whole lot of emails to go through. Thank you very much. Like I said, my email's blowing up right over here.
Yes, if you're a pastor and you're on this webinar, you know to look for the email from us about this with the workbook. But if you're a layperson and your pastor may not be looking for the email, and then they may not forward it to you or just set it aside. So please give us your email as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a lot of those coming in. Okay. It is 6:57. I don't see any last minute questions. Andre, Braxton, Gilbert, Charlotte, everybody from the team with McGriff, we are grateful for your time with us. We're also grateful for members of the task force that have participated in helping pick you and participate in the seminar tonight, or webinar tonight. Thanks, Kevin, for example, for many good questions. Appreciate that. Any final questions before we go? Okay, you will be getting email from us.
Will, please make sure you have our contact information, and if anybody had a question that didn't get answered tonight, call us, please.
Yep. And we will send out a copy of the slides that Andre had, which also has their contact information on the slide. It's going to be in the email. You will have contact information in lots of different ways of McGriff and of Robert Besser and myself. Okay. Thank you, everybody.